Hello everyone, this is Dantas here from the Zero to Hero Academy. Over the years we have helped multiple professionals either get into the Power Platform market or some of the seasoned professionals within the industry up their game within the low-code technologies. And we are here to announce that we have a special program coming up between March 19th and May 30th. This is the Power Pages and AI Zero to Hero Mentorship Program. Join us, click on the link, access the lessons. You know how we do it. Live lessons on Teams, and then the recorder goes up to YouTube and you can follow if you are in different time zones, but we prefer it to join it live. Connect, ask questions. So go ahead, invite your colleagues, your dad, your mom, your grandpa. Let's everybody join the fun. All right, we'll see you there. Take care.
Okay, well, let's get started here. So thanks everyone for joining the second of my two sessions here, where we're just going to continue on talking about content authoring in Power Pages. We're going to be going over a little bit more today in terms of how content makes ALM a little bit trickier, and some of the techniques that on the pro dev side of things, some of the techniques you can use to make the lives easier of those who are maybe authoring that content. So just a quick intro in case this is the first time you've attended a session with me. My name is Nicholas Hayduk. I am the president and software engineer at Engineered Code Consulting Inc., based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I have been working with this Power Pages product for a long time, 14 plus years. My career began with a company called ADX Studio, which was the company that originally built what was then known as ADX Studio Portals and was acquired by Microsoft in 2015, has gone through a few renames, but is now known as Power Pages. If you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. We've also got a Twitter account, or an X account, I guess now. We've got a blog that we put out a blog post pretty much every month. We've got our YouTube channel where we put the tips that we do. So we do a quick kind of like 2-minute roughly tip every Tuesday. Do a podcast with George Dubinsky called Refresh the Cache. So that gets, we release, episodes on the crm.audio channel, as well as I do a monthly Portals community call, which is a session similar to this where we talk about the latest Power Pages news, and then I kind of pick a topic to deep dive in and answer people's questions. So feel free to sign up for those and join us for those as well. So that's a quick intro on who I am. In terms of agenda, I'm going to just repeat the very beginning from last from Tuesday, and essentially kind of just level set in terms of what do we mean by content authoring. Then we're going to talk about why does content make ALM tricky, and then we will talk a little bit about what techniques are out there to separate the content from the code, and we do that to make our lives a little bit easier in terms of ALM. And then I expect that there'll be some time for Q&A, and you can kind of ask whatever questions you might have. That being said, feel free to ask any questions you might have in the chat. I will do my very best to keep an eye on that, but if anyone, if there are questions in the chat and I'm ignoring them, feel free to come on off mute and just ask me. That's fine too. So feel free to ask your questions at any point throughout the session. Okay, so what do we mean by content authoring? So when we talk about content authoring, what we're talking about is when we're talking about content, we're talking about text and images primarily, also kind of web files. So whether it's like you want to upload a PDF document or videos, but again, primarily kind of text and images, links, all that sort of stuff. So what we're not really talking about is your business data that's coming from Dataverse. So the tables that we're talking about in terms of the Power Pages tables would be, we're talking about kind of managing web pages. We're talking about web files, web link sets, content snippets. Those are the kind of things that we're talking about when we're talking about content. So making changes to the text or images on a particular page. What we're not talking about is the actual kind of functionality of talking to Dataverse or any of the code that you might be writing. So, and the reason that we're kind of separating this out is that often there's someone other than the quote unquote developer of the site that might be managing the content. So sometimes someone with more of a marketing background might be the one updating the verbiage on the website. They might be the one putting up a blog post. They might be the one adding a new page. So that's often different than the person who would be in there creating a new form or creating a new list or writing some JavaScript to talk to the web API, that sort of thing. So we're trying to separate out the main content on the website, images, text, links, that sort of thing. And so as we're building out as a developer, and again, this session is more targeted as someone who's building out a Power Pages site, how should we be accounting for the fact that, do we foresee that there is going to be that role of a person who just needs to manage the content and won't necessarily have the same skill set in terms of, crazy HTML or JavaScript code or anything like that. So what we're going to be talking about today is, as a developer, how do I make my site, how do I build my site so that we're accounting for this role of there being the kind of the content author. So of course, the first thing you have to identify is, like, does that role exist for your particular project? Whatever you're building, do we foresee the need to have someone who is a content author update that content, who may not have the same skill set in terms of knowing how lists and forms work, or maybe they don't have that kind of in-depth HTML or CSS knowledge. So do we foresee that the need in our project for a content author to be able to manage the content on the site without necessarily having that deeper experience in the on the more kind of the pro code side? So again, what do we not mean by content authoring? Creating lists and forms, that's kind of a separate beast. Writing Liquid or JavaScript, using the web API. Those would be things that we would talk about either as the citizen developers or the pro code developers, the ones building out the functionality of your Power Pages site. What we're talking about here, again, is a separate role, someone just managing the text that would appear on the site. Okay, so how does content make our ALM tricky? So in kind of general, and we covered this a bit last time as well, but the big challenge with Power Pages is that the vast majority of the work that you're doing, whether it's on the content side or whether it's on the citizen dev or even the pro dev side, much of the work you do is stored as data within Dataverse. So it's stored within the rows of data in Dataverse, and whether that's in the web pages or whether that's in the web files or whether that's in the lists and forms and all that sort of stuff. So all of this, generally most of the work that you're doing, you're storing as data within Dataverse. And what makes it tricky is that if we're going to separate the code, the quote unquote code, or the thing that the builder of the website or of your Power Pages site is going to do, versus someone who's just trying to manage the content, often that exists in the same place. So it can be difficult to draw the line between, hey, I have a page where maybe I've built out a custom form and I want to be able to show a message when the validation fails, but perhaps the error message that will be displayed when the validation fails, maybe that's a piece of content that the marketing person might have to write, or there may be some business users in there that want the ability to adjust what that message says, but they probably don't want to have to kind of rifle through all the JavaScript and figure out, how I'm going to change all my JavaScript. So the methods that we can use to make our ALM life a little bit easier kind of depend on which method of ALM, which technique you're using for ALM. Now, just to kind of redefine what we talked about on Tuesday in terms of like, what do we mean by ALM? When we talk about ALM, we're talking about moving from dev to test to UAT to prod. So essentially, hopefully you're building up most of your content, or sorry, most of your site in development, in a development environment, and then moving it between the different environments for various stages of testing. What the other part of what makes content tricky in terms of ALM is that often those changes aren't going to be made in all of those environments. If you think of just something like, say, a blog post, if you use the community template within Power Pages, if you're going to post a new blog post, it's likely that the person who's writing that blog post isn't going to want to create that in the dev environment and then talk to the developer and ask them to do a promotion of the website code to the test environment, and then have someone test the blog post and then push it to the UAT environment and then push it to production eventually, right? Power Pages has basic content management capabilities. And so the idea is often that those types of changes, adding a new page, adding a new blog post, changing some text, that can be done directly and doesn't have to follow the entire ALM process. What that means is that your production environment gets out of date compared to development. You have new content that exists in production that doesn't necessarily exist in development. So if you were to use a technique where all of your changes that you've made in dev get pushed up to production all the time, you could very likely be overriding changes in production that are the kind of the true master changes. So what we have to do is essentially separate our content from the code, so that when we talk about our ALM process, what we're doing is we're pushing the code between environments, but we leave the content alone. And again, that's kind of easier said than done in many cases. And again, it depends on how you're doing your ALM. There's lots of different options for doing ALM with Power Pages. We're going to talk about two specifically. There's a third one I might touch on. But the first one I'm going to talk about is using solutions. This is the new way, kind of the new preferred way from Microsoft to move your Power Pages configuration between environments. And this has to do with the enhanced data model. So the reason the enhanced data model exists is to enable us to use solutions for ALM. And the idea is that you can actually take data from Dataverse and include it in your solution, so that when you export a solution, that data from Dataverse is actually moved between the environments. This is different than kind of traditionally solutions were not about data, they were about metadata. So solutions contain the definitions of the tables and the columns and all that sort of stuff. But when you actually moved those solutions between environments, there was no data in those tables. It was just the definition of what those tables were and the columns they had in it. But there have been some kind of examples historically where there are certain aspects of Dataverse, and we kind of call it solution aware. So there's data that is essentially solution aware. So when you move a solution between environments, it's not just metadata, you can actually move rows from Dataverse. So the reason that Microsoft is transitioning or created this enhanced data model is they wanted to make those Power Pages tables solution aware, so that you can include records, rows in the Dataverse database and move those across to different environments using solutions. So within the enhanced data model, the tables there's kind of a couple of primary tables. One thing to note is that in the enhanced data model, much of the tables that you might be familiar with, such as kind of web page, web file, page template, those are actually all now virtual tables that all point back to one central table called Power Page Component. And again, this was all kind of done as part of this desire to move to this new solution-aware data. So that one table, that Power Pages Component table is the one that is solution aware. And so when you have rows in that particular table, you can add them to your solution. Now, the thing about that, where that makes our ALM life a little trickier, is that you have to move entire rows when you select a row. So let's just say if we had a particular web page that we wanted to move between all of our different environments, you essentially have to move the entire web page. You can't select individual columns on that web page. So you have to move its content, all the, it's which page templates it's related to, all of the columns on that particular row will move across as part of the solution. You can't pick and choose parts of a particular row to move between environments. And like I said, this is the thing that it's relatively new. This is the way that Microsoft is going in terms of ALM. But again, where this makes it challenging is that if you decide that you have a particular page that you want to move across, you don't necessarily have the option to include or exclude certain aspects of that page. It's kind of, you have to take the whole thing or nothing at all. Before the enhanced data model came about and before our data was solution aware, the kind of preferred method by Microsoft of moving data between environments was the use of a tool that's been around a long time called the configuration migration tool. And as the name sounds, this tool is specifically designed for moving configuration data between environments. And so Power Pages is a perfect example of that. The data that's we're talking about in terms of web pages, web files, content snippets, site settings, that's configuration data. So that tool was specifically meant to allow you to export data from one environment and import data into a downstream environment. What's great about that tool is that you do have the ability to choose specific columns. So if you want to move a particular web page record, you can use fetch XML to define which web page records you want to include in your export. But you also have the ability to include or exclude whichever columns you want. So for example, you could move the page template, but you could choose not to move the content across. And so that's a perfect example of where the configuration migration tool gives you a little bit more flexibility and can help you deal with this idea of separating code from content. So you'll see I've got my next point here about put code into web templates or page templates so that web pages are the author's domain. So I'll go into an example of kind of what this looks like. But the idea here is that you just have to be through some careful planning. I would say no solution is perfect, but through some careful planning, you can essentially figure out, you come up with a plan where the code resides in certain tables or in certain columns on certain tables, and then the content resides in other places. And so you can design your ALM process so that it will move your content, or it will move your code, but it will leave the content alone. So again, doing this at the web page level, I would suggest putting that code into web templates or the page templates, so that the actual content of the page is something that's in kind of the author's control. And then the other kind of big technique that we'll look at is using content snippets to allow the author to make changes to content that exists within the code. So those are going to be the two things that we're going to dive into here in a second. Is that using web templates or page templates to kind of put your code into certain places, and then kind of defining, hey, the content of the copy attribute of a particular web page, we're going to assume that's the user can do whatever they want to that. We're going to try as much as possible to not put any of our quote unquote code in the content section of the web page, and we're going to leave that section up to the authors. And then if we do need to put some content within our code, the way that we make it so that the authors can change that is by using content snippets. So, like I said, separating content from code. What are our techniques? Web templates, content snippets. We can also use site settings as well, but for the most part, we're going to be looking at content snippets. So I'm going to open up my site here, and we'll go through an example first of using page templates, web templates, and kind of defining defining a situation where we're saying, hey, these particular rows or these particular columns are, we'll leave those to the authors, and then what the rest of the columns we're going to say are kind of code columns, for example. Okay, I'm going to bring up my other screen here. Okay, so if I go to my Power Pages site, just going to refresh things here. So I've got my site. I'm going to go here and edit something. I'm going to say edit the site. Now, when we're building out a site and we're creating a new page, we get the option to pick which layouts do we want to use. And you can see here we've got some custom layouts, we've got some standard layouts. And what this kind of ties back to are, if we go into our portal management app, we've got our page templates. Where we go, right there, page templates. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to filter this to show the page templates that we've got here. Apply. Okay, so if you'll notice that there's actually two types of page templates. So there's something called rewrite page templates, and then there's web template page templates. If we go back to here for just for a second, you'll see that if I go into my custom things, you'll see that there's JavaScript and custom search service. If we go back here, you'll see that we've got our default, and then our two custom ones are custom search service and JS. So you'll see that the ones without a rewrite URL are the ones that show up as web templates. So if I create a new page template, and again, the purpose of a page template is to essentially define where, or basically what is the layout of that particular page. For the most part, every page has the header and footer, right? If I look at, okay, I'm going to click cancel here. I'm just going to preview this. So for the most part, every page has the header and the footer. And when we're defining a particular page, what we're doing is we're defining what exists between that header and that footer. And so the most basic of page template will essentially just say whatever content the user happens to put in the page, that will be what shows up between the header and footer. So if I look at my page template, I'm actually going to look at our default studio template. You'll see that it uses this particular web template. And this web template, all it really does, it has a div wrapper, and then it just says include the page copy. So if you're familiar with Liquid, when it says include page copy, that means we're including another web template. So I'm going to go into my web templates. And there's going to be one called page copy. Which one here? This one here. They should all be the same. But you'll see that this one is pretty much, it's a div that surrounds, and all it does is essentially display the ADX underscore copy attribute. So if I look at a particular web page, and I'm going to look at, let's see here, this new content page. I think that's the one that we had created last time. So if I look at new content page, in fact, why don't I look at it in here in the VS Code integration? I'll just open that up again for the people who maybe didn't see that on Tuesday. So if I go to my page here in the Design Studio and I click Edit Code, that's going to open up VS Code Online. And what I'm going to see here is the actual content. I do that. This is the actual ADX_copy attribute for this particular web page, and specifically for this particular language. Each language would get its own copy section. Get rid of Copilot. So if you, in the simplest terms, every page has its header, every page has its footer for the most part, and then what's in between is based on the page template. So again, if I go back to new content, if we kind of go down the rabbit hole, we've got this new content page. This content page is using this page template. So it's using the default Studio template. So this template says, yes, I want to use the header and footer. So assume that whatever we have in the header web template is there, whatever we have in the footer web template is there, and in between is whatever we put in this web template. So within this web template, we have this main content, and then within that page copy, we had another div. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to just look at this page. I'm going to say view source. I'm just going to look for this main content. So nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, that little bar is in the way. I know everyone's experienced that thing before. Okay, so here's our main content div. And then if you remember, within the main content, we had the page copy. So there's our page copy div. And then literally exactly what we have in here, div ID I69OS4 is right in here. Now there's a little bit because of the front side editing, but I go to the side here. Div ID I69OS4. So this particular page is a combination of the header, the footer at the end, and then what's in between is based on my page template. And then this is the simplest of all the page template because it really is, it has a couple wrapper divs, and then it just outputs the ADX copy page. So when we talk about the content of a page, what we're talking about is the ADX_copy attribute, and that's what you'll see is located in here. So my recommendation is, for the most part, assume that the content of the page, the copy section of a web page, is the domain of the author. For the most part, when you're building Power Pages sites, don't put your work within the copy section. If you need to add some custom HTML to a page, do that as part of the page template. And so we can create a new page template. So let's do that. Page template. I'm going to create a new one called Nick. I'm going to say NHPAP. Now, again, the type, just as somewhat of an aside, the rewrite ones, those point to ASPX files. You do not have the ability to create ASPX files. Those exist or managed by Microsoft on the server. So if you see existing page templates that have that set up, you can use them, but you don't have the ability to add your own ASPX files. So those ones just kind of, they exist, those ones are there, but you can't create your own. So if you're creating your own web template, it must be a web template one. I want to use my website header and footer. Let's say just for whatever reason, I want to create a page template that just has some standard text at the top of the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here. I'm going to say new web template. Yeah, I should have created that web template first. That's okay. It's not going to let me save. All right, I'll have to just do this in the wrong order here. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just pick a different web template just for now. Let's just pick that one. I'm going to say use web template, use website header and footer, and I'm going to save that. So next, what I'm going to do, so there's my web template. I'm going to create a new web template. And I'm going to call this Nick Page Template. And I'm going to say NHPAP. And my source for now is I'm just going to put in H1 Nick page template. Just and I'll kind of illustrate a point here about how that content works. So I'm going to click save. Now I'm going to go back to my page template, find mine, and I'm going to update this. I say Nick page template. Save and close that. Now, if I go back to my design studio, I'm going to hit the sync button. The reason I'm going to hit the sync button is because there's a caching layer within the design studio so that when I make changes to Dataverse, whether through the model-driven app or different ways that I make changes to Dataverse, I have to click the sync button to get the design studio to refresh. This is different than getting the actual website itself to refresh. To do that, we use the preview button. But when we want the design studio itself to be refreshed, we use the sync button. So now that I go to create a new page, I have the option of my Nick page template. So I'm going to call this new web page Nick page template example. Sure, let's add to the main navigation. I'm going to click add, and we'll see what our page looks like. So just as an example, I'm going to add some text here. I'll say hello, and I'm going to click away. That's going to save, and I'm going to preview my page. We'll see what that looks like. So we've got my content. That was actually not what I was expecting. Let me just make sure we've got the right page template. It didn't, for whatever reason, pull in the right page template. So let's fix that. Even though I thought I selected mine, it doesn't seem like that worked. I'm going to call this Nick. Default studio template. Okay, might be a bug in there. So I'm just going to override this here with mine. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to double check. Whenever you make a change to the root web page, you always want to go into the content page and verify that it's moved across as well. So now it's using that page template. Now, because I'm expecting, I'm going to click the sync button here because I want to see how that changes it in the design studio. Right. So now you can see I've got that Nick page template, which was the H1 that I included in my web template. But what you'll notice is that I don't have anywhere to put any content in here. And again, if I preview this and I go into here, again, the hello has gone away. And that is because the hello was saved into the ADX_copy attribute of my web page. But my page template isn't using that. There's nothing out of the box. There's nothing that forces your web template to display the content of the page. You are in essentially full control of what happens between the header and the footer of your page. And so it is up to you to decide that in your web template that you want to display the copy. So I'm going to add that here. And all I'm going to do is going to go to this, and I'm going to do ADX_copy. I think I have to go page.adx_copy. Or to be consistent with the rest, I can do include page copy. This is including, and I'll have to switch these out because include statements are this. So includes page copy. Now, if I go back to my web templates, all that's basically doing is inserting this. So editable page copy. So it's going to do this. So now if I go back to my design studio and I say sync, what I would expect to see is still the Nick page template because I include that at the top, but now my copy section where my content goes will appear below that. So now you can see that if I want to enforce as part of my project, as part of my code, that there'll be some text in there or basically the formatting of the title, I can do that because what I've done is I've created a page template where I put in my work. Again, I'll go back into this. So here's my page template where I've got my work that, and we basically tell the content authors, hey, you don't get to touch web templates. Those are not your domain. Your domain is the page copy. So I've built my thing here, and I've done this. So this will, again, so then when we start thinking about my ALM process, I can now move the page when I move my work across, what I'm moving really is my page templates. I can move my entire page template record because the content author isn't touching the page template. They're touching the web page content. So in our ALM process, we move the code, so we move the web template. But what we don't do is we don't move the actual web page record. So that allows the user to create new pages in production, and we haven't tied that into the web page, into that the content isn't being tied into our ALM process. Now, what if I wanted to do something like this? I want to have engineered code, and I just want to put in my company title at the beginning of every single at the beginning of every single page. What if I wanted this title to appear there? But what if perhaps I knew that I wanted something consistent at the top of the page, but I wanted the user to be able to manage that. So I'm just going to change this to engineered code. And I want the user to be able to manage that, but I always want it to be within an H1. And I don't want the user, like I always want to be part of the template. So I don't want the user to be able to remove that, but perhaps I don't want to hard code the text to engineered code here. This is when you would use content snippets. So rather than hard code this text here, what I do is, and I'll probably get the syntax wrong here. I think it's snippet. Let me just look that up. Go into web templates here. Header. Right here, there we go. Here's an example. Template. So instead of engineered code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this. Type's going to be text, where this is a snippet, where the name is mobile header and the type is text. So in here, I'm going to say Nick snippet. So this is the name of the snippet that I'm pulling from. So that's not the text I'm going to expect to see, but that's the name of my content snippet. So now if I save this, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to preview my page. And because I haven't actually put any content in for that snippet, I would expect that my title to go away. Now, in the front side editing, you can actually edit the snippet. But as we discussed on Tuesday, the content snippet, or sorry, the front side editing is deprecated. So I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to show you how that works because that's, it could go away soon. So instead, I'll just show you kind of the old fashioned way of doing it, which is in the model driven app. We've got content snippets. I'm going to create a new one. I call it Nick snippet. NHPAP. Display name, type text, language, and then the value. So in here, I'm going to say title. So here's the actual value of my snippet. Now, if I click save on that, click preview here, I'm hoping I'll see title. There we go. So now we've got a content managed piece within our code. So again, when we talked about how kind of the web pages, that's the domain of the author, content snippets, that's also the domain of the author. For the most part, we want people to not use web templates, content authors not to use web templates. We say, hey, what's up to you are these web files, web pages, and content snippets. So if they want to change this title, they just go into the content snippets, they put in a new title, they go into here, I can sync this to get this title. We should then see new title right here. Oh, liquid object not found. Okay, it doesn't like displaying that on here. That's fine. We'll see it in real life. There we go, new title. So this is a way of inserting into my code. Now, of course, this is a pretty simple example. Back to here. If I go back to my web template, actually, I'm a VS Code kind of guy, so I can actually see it in here. If I go back here, I'm going to edit code, open up my VS Code. And I can view all my web templates in VS Code as well. So slightly better user experience as far as I'm concerned. Once it loads, of course. Okay, I'm getting impatient here. Let's try that again. It usually doesn't take that long. All right, well, we'll wait for that to load, but we'll keep going here. So within my web templates, we've got it here. So now we're using our snippet instead of hard coding text. Now, again, this was a basic example. Where this becomes very useful is when you're building out, say, a complex form that you're building out with JavaScript, and you want the person to be able to control them, like maybe the error messages. Or perhaps the labels on the forms. Content snippets are a great way to do that. So rather than hard coding those things, you use Liquid to insert those content snippets. Now, I want to kind of separate that from the out-of-the-box lists and forms. The column titles or the like the field labels on forms, the column titles on lists. Those by default come via the actual labels that appear on the Dataverse views and forms. You can override those labels using, in the case of lists, you can override the columns. There's an advanced configuration thing where you can override the column names. In terms of a form, you can put on entity metadata, entity form metadata, which allows you to override the labels there as well. But that's kind of outside of this, because we're not really talking about lists and forms. We're talking purely about kind of content and separating that from the code. So again, the two what I recommend you do is that you plan and you figure out which tables, and if you're using the configuration migration tool, you've got even a little bit more flexibility, because you don't necessarily even have to split it by tables, but I would look at on a table which columns are kind of the content authors or not. An example of where it's nice to be able to choose that is there are some times where you do want the web pages to be part of your ALM process. So you do want the web pages to move from different environments. But what you do is you move the web pages, and perhaps you move the column that indicates which page template they're using, but you exclude the copy attribute. So that's the most common way that we do it. Is we're still using the configuration migration tool to move our data between environments, and so the web page will often include it because there's often site markers, and you're redirecting certain pages, and there are certain pages that you're just expecting to be there, and you're going to move those over with your ALM process. But often the copy attribute on those web pages, you may move it over at the very beginning just to kind of pre-fill the data, but then for any subsequent moves of the data across, you just exclude the copy section of the page template. Okay, look, our thing finally loaded over here. Yes, I know I'm editing the live site. So we're just going to go. So in terms of web templates in our list here, so there's our next page template. It's in there as well. So that's kind of the idea, is that you just have to kind of clearly define what you consider to be in the domain of your content author versus what you consider to be in the domain of the developer, or like the person who's building the site. Kind of define those rules, try and stick to those rules. Of course, there's always exceptions, but for the most part, you can kind of follow those rules. And then the things that are under the domain of the developer, those are the things that you include in your ALM process. And the things that are under the domain of the content author, you exclude those from your ALM process. Okay, so again, we talked about web templates, content snippets. Site settings are very similar to content snippets. The big thing there is that they're generally like they're not rich text, or like they're generally used for API keys or other settings to whether to hide or show something. Really, the big difference between content snippets and site settings is that site settings usually are not displayed to the user, so they're a setting to control something. They're still kind of a key value pair. So we saw that with the content snippets where there's a key, there was a name of it, and then basically a value that got displayed. It's similar with site settings. There's a name to it. That's your key. It gives you some sort of value. But for the most part with site settings, you're not displaying that to the user. You're using that to control some sort of setting. The other big thing with content snippets is that they are multilingual. So when you define, if you have multiple languages, you can have the same content snippet or the same name in your content snippet, in multiple records, one for each language. Site settings are not multilingual. All right. So we've got about 10 minutes left here. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't see any yet, but I will pause here and see if anyone has any questions about what we talked about today. If you folks were with us on Tuesday, happy to answer any questions on that. Or if you've got random Power Pages questions, I'm happy to answer any questions about anything, I guess.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the comments area. And Nick, sorry I joined late. I had a little bit of a power outage drama here in the neighborhood.
Well, at
But
least
yeah, I
the
don't see
recording worked
anything.
this time, so.
That's good. That's a good thing. No, I don't personally have questions. I think the idea of segregating as much page parts, if you will, or page elements from content was that's an awesome tip, especially because like you said, you can then segregate what you push through ALM. And I have encountered projects where the customer says, all I want is this particular format for the pages, and I will add content when I'm ready. And so you don't want to create stuff in a lower lane environments just to be forced to push them to production when the time's right. So that was really good. Let's see if there is anything in the chat area. I don't think there is anything here. Yeah. So yeah, that was the only comment I had.
Okay. Well, that's all I've got. So I think we can probably wrap up just a couple minutes early then.
All right. Thanks, Nick, for your time, and we'll connect again soon. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Nick. That was great. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.